What is up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So in today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different from usual. Instead of what I usually do, which is Fortnite tips and tricks, today we're going to be doing a tier list of every Fortnite season up until chapter 4. It's pretty self-explanatory, so before we get into it, be sure to drop a like on the video if you enjoy it. Consider subscribing as well if you're new to the channel and want to see more content. And without further ado, let's get into this tier list. Alrighty guys, so here we are on the tier list, and we're basically just going to get started with chapter 1 season 1. As you guys can see, I have S, A, B, C, D, F. So basically it's like a grading system, except S is just way at the top, like it's even better than A. It's just amazing. So with that said, we're going to start from chapter 1 season 1, and we're just going to work our way all the way up to chapter 4. And I know the preseason did happen before season 1 was even a thing, but we're just going to call it season 1, and we're just going to combine that all. So season 1 is pretty much the complete OG Fortnite. It's when the game first started, and I'm going to put it in the decent category. There are a lot of good memories and stuff, and it was an amazing game back then, but when you really look back at it compared to the current seasons, it just wasn't really good. It was fun, it was exciting, but the game just really wasn't that developed. So while the gameplay was great and everybody has fond memories of it, I gotta put it in a lower category. Moving on to our second season, we've got chapter 1 season 2. This was the first season that had a battle pass. It had the battle pass basically to tier 70, I think. We also had the introduction of things like the chug jug. We had tilted towers, and it was like a medieval theme. It was definitely like a much more developed version of season 1, where you kind of started to see some of the modern features we all love now. So with that said, I'm gonna put it at the top of the decent category. It's better than season 1, but it's still not super developed where I can say it's like a good season. All right, I guess I'm probably gonna put it at the bottom of the pretty good. I mean, it was a great season, don't get me wrong, and it was really fun, but kind of with season 1, you kind of just have to compare it to all the current seasons and just be like, yeah, I mean, it was fun, it was great, but the current seasons are just so much more developed. I just wouldn't be able to be honest with you guys and say that it's like a great or amazing season. It's great in our memories, but in terms of the actual development of the game, it still wasn't really in a great spot. Moving on to chapter 1 season 3 though, and this is going to be our first one in the great category, I think. At this point, the game was starting to develop a lot more. It got a whole new battle pass, tier 100. The guided missile was added this season, I think, along with some other things, and lucky landing was added, and I'm pretty sure some other POIs as well. The map really started to develop as well. It didn't feel quite as empty anymore, and there were a lot more options to choose from. I think overall, it's safe to say that this season was a great season. Season 4 was another great one in my opinion. This is when Dusty Depot was replaced with Dusty Divot, and it's kind of the first major POI change, at least in terms of removal, that we ever saw. You also had the Moisty Mire turning into like a movie type studio or something like that, and the whole thing revolved around superheroes, so it had a really cool battle pass. I'm also going to put this one in probably the top of the pretty good category. Actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to put it in the great category as well. Moving on to chapter 1 season 5 though, and this was personally a really good season in my opinion for the most part. For example, you had the Paradise Palms and the whole desert biome added at the bottom. You also had rifts added, so you could go basically across the map super quickly. And then you had other items like the grappler, you had Tomato Temple added, and various stuff like that. The biggest problem I saw with this season was that it kind of turned into a spray meta. With the drum gun and the SMG in the game both being added in this season, it really just became a spray fest, and everybody was just trying to spray one another to death. So although it was a good season aside from that, and I think it would have been way higher on the list if it wasn't a spray season, I am probably gonna have to put it in like the decent category. It wasn't bad by any means, but I just wouldn't say it was great. Moving on to season 6 though, and this was a very good point for the game. At least from a storyline perspective, I felt like it was really interesting, and it kind of had a lot of new developments. This is where the floating island became a thing, and then you had the corrupted areas all over the map, and the whole kind of theme was like Halloween, darkness, corruption, and all of that. This was actually the first Fortnite season as well, and you had the cube monsters all over the map, and tons of new items like balloons, quad crashers, and quad launchers. I did enjoy this season personally, but I also feel like they kind of took it overboard with some of the cube monster stuff. Like Fortnite just lasted a really long time, and it was just weird. I mean, if you look back in season 6, like a lot of people weren't in favor of it, and I remember it as being a pretty good season, but there also was that lower point. So with that said, I'm gonna probably put this in the decent category as well. Like with this season, I can't call it bad for the Fortnite stuff, but I just can't call it great because it was just way overextended, and it just wasn't that great. Not to mention you also had the quad launchers and all sorts of stuff that kind of made it a bit harder to play, but it was still a good season. I enjoyed it personally. Moving on to season 7 though, and this was the snow season. This one had the whole snowy biome added to the map, like Polar Peaks, Frosty Flights, Happy Hamlet. As well as that, we had Fortnite Creative added, which was absolutely insane. Basically, you can build anything you want, you can play all sorts of maps, and basically it's the creative we know today. But there is one problem. If you guys don't remember, this was when the Infinity Blade became a thing. And I'm not sure if you guys remember it, but the Infinity Blade was absolutely insane. Like, you could give it to a total NPC and they'd be able to drop a 20 bomb with it. It was just wildly overpowered. The whole whole game was basically a fight to get the Infinity Blade, and then whoever gets the Infinity Blade wins. So with that said, it was a good season overall, and I personally enjoyed every aspect except the Infinity Blade. But once again, I'm probably gonna have to put it in the decent category. I know we're kind of filling up this category right now. I can't put it in below average purely because of the Infinity Blade, especially because they fixed it, but I also can't say it's good while just ignoring the Infinity Blade situation. On to season 8 though, and this was the pirate season. This one saw a bunch of different changes along the northeast section of the map. For example, you had Sunny Steps, you had Lazy Lagoon, you had the volcano. And this was actually the first live event where players actually decided something, which is the unvaulting. In the unvaulting event, basically everybody went and voted on which one they wanted, and people chose the drum gun for some reason. It was later vaulted again in season X, but we had the drum gun for a while after this. And honestly, even though the drum gun was back in the game, which I personally wasn't a big fan of, this was a great season in my opinion. In fact, I'm tempted to put this in the amazing category, but there are some amazing seasons in here. You know what? I'm gonna do it. Chapter 1, season 8, amazing season, pretty well balanced, and this was actually the World Cup season as well, which even makes it even better. Obviously, the World Cup itself happened in season 9, but a lot of the qualifiers happened at this point, or were announced. Moving on to season 9 though, and we've got the futuristic season. This is when we had Neo Tilted, we had Mega Mall, we had the pressure plant, and this is also when we had the slipstreams all around the map and the drones. Overall, this was a pretty good season. I don't remember too much being bad about it, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the pretty good category. It did have its ups and downs, but we also had the World Cup, which basically brings that season up way more. So I think the pretty good category is a good place to put it. Moving on to season X though, and oh boy, this is going to be an interesting one. So for the final season of chapter 1, Epic decided to basically just add a massive robot that could kill anybody. If you don't remember, it was called the Brute, and basically could shoot 10 rockets at a time, and it was just wildly overpowered. Although we had some cool stuff like the rift zones and all of that, and kind of had some OG locations coming back, and we had a really cool event at the end of the chapter, I really just wouldn't be honest with you guys if I said this was not going in the F category. In most senses, it was a pretty good season. Like, for example, the rift zones are pretty cool. They had their own unique sort of thing. For example, you couldn't build in like Tilted, and you couldn't do various things in other locations. But yeah, I mean, I just have to put it down there because of the mechs. They were just wildly overpowered, and I don't understand what Epic was thinking. There were some good aspects of the season, but that basically has to overrule all of it. Moving on though, chapter 2, season 1, and we're finally getting into our second chapter of the game. This is where the entire map was changed. We lost our chapter 1 map, and we had a whole new game basically. We had an absolute ton of things like the bandage bazooka, the motorboat. Obviously, we had the entire new map, which is insane. We also had a bunch of pretty good tournaments like the cash cups and whatnot, which were pretty fun. Personally, this was one of the best seasons I look back on in terms of competitive, aside from World Cup. And this was also the squad season, which was really interesting in terms of FNCS, and we had some really good competition there. The only problem I really had with this season is that it went so long. It went from like October 2019 to February 2020. It was literally like a 5-month season, and they just didn't change anything at a certain point. So although this season had pretty much potential to be all the way at the top, I'm gonna have to put it in like the pretty good category. It would be great or amazing, but it just lasted so long and it got so dull after a while, and they didn't really change anything. But getting into the second season here, and we've got chapter 2, season 2, which is the war between Ghost and Shadow. We had all sorts of new mythic items. We had the shark, we had the agency in the middle, and we had a couple of other locations around. This is also the season of the Travis Scott event, and we had the henchmen introduced. And really, this was a good season. It didn't last too long, and I'm gonna put this in the great category. It was just a pretty good season. I mean, it had a lot of new features and whatnot, and I just don't have really many complaints about it. I guess you could argue some of the mythic weapons were a bit OP, but really, I mean, that's what a mythic weapon is supposed to be, and everybody had the opportunity to get them. Plus, it's not like the Infinity Blade where you just get it and then you win the game. So yeah, I think the great category is a good option for this one. On to chapter 2, season 3, and this is when we had the flood. Basically, at the beginning of the season, we had the entire map flooded, and it slowly shrunk throughout. This was also when cars were introduced, which was obviously a game-changing addition. And overall, I'm going to put this in pretty good. It was a very good season, but I think the Marauders kind of, they got annoying after a while. But I did enjoy all the new POIs, and overall, I think it fits in the pretty good category. Moving on to chapter 2, season 4, though, and we've got the first ever crossover season, which was a crossover with Marvel. We had the whole Stark Industries area, which was basically lifted up from the rest of the map. We also had various Marvel LTMs, and overall, it was just a great season. This was definitely one of the high points for competitive. I think everybody loved the whole pump debacle and the pump being back in the game after chapter Chapter 2 Season 3. That was actually something I left out about the last season, is that they removed the pump. That's kind of why I didn't put in the great or amazing. But I'd say this season was overall fantastic for competitive. Arena grinding was super fun at this point, and I'm gonna put it probably right at the top of pretty good. On to Chapter 2 Season 5, and this one was the Bounty Hunter season. We had the desert biome appear around the 0 point, which was kind of in the same area as Stark Industries. This was a pretty cool season overall in my opinion. I really enjoyed the new changes, but it was cool changes at first, and then it really just started to get old very fast. I'd say it was a good season, but it wasn't particularly memorable in my mind, so I'm going to put it in the top of the decent category. It was a good season, and I'm sure I'm going to get some hate for saying this, but I just don't think it was that great or memorable. But moving on, we've got Chapter 2 Season 6. This is the season where we had all the makeshift weapons and you had to craft them into regular weapons. We also had the primal biome appear at the center of the map, and we had all sorts of new things like the makeshift shotguns, the primal bows, and all sorts of stuff like that. I kind of look back at this a bit more fondly now that I've seen the rest of the seasons and kind of see how these changes play out over time. But I really think Epic missed the ball with this one, and I'm gonna have to put this in the below average category. It wasn't a terrible season, but I definitely wouldn't put it anywhere near the top. It's not like Season X Brute type of bad, but it's also not anywhere near like various other seasons. So yeah, I think below average is a good spot to put it. I really just think the makeshift type stuff just didn't work out, and I think it just messed up the loot pool in my opinion. Moving on to Chapter 2 Season 7 though, and this was like the war season between the aliens and the IO. This is where we had the whole like UFO situation and all of that stuff, and we had the UFOs in the game as well. I'd say that this season was kind of weird in pubs, but competitive was absolutely amazing. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the pretty good category. Competitive was great, the pumps were in the game, and everything was going pretty well in that regard, but there were also some of these changes were a bit kind of shaky. So yeah, I think pretty good's a good place to put it. Moving on to Chapter 2 Season 8 though, and this is where we had the sideways and all of that. Honestly, kind of similar to Season 5, this really wasn't a particularly memorable season for me. I remember the final event, which was really cool, and we had the Cube Queen and all of that. I think this is where like we had all the corruption around the map and all that sort of stuff, and it was pretty cool, but I really just don't remember it too good as a competitive season, and I think the decent category is pretty good to put this in. Moving on though, Chapter 3 we finally had come out, and this is where we had the Spider-Man item, we had the whole new map. This was an absolutely enormous change, and personally I loved the first chapter of Season 3. Did I say Season 3? I meant Chapter 3. This season was absolutely amazing, a ton of mobility, and this is where, I mean, it was just a great season, guys. I gotta put it in amazing. I know some of you might not agree with me, like for example, I think the MK7 it was called, I think that was a bit overpowered and it didn't really need to be that strong, and various other kind of little things weren't great, but overall it was an amazing season. I loved it, and I think it was perfect. Okay, not perfect, but it was very good. Moving on to Chapter 3 Season 2, and this is where we had the 7 and the IO war. We also had new stuff like mantling and sprinting and all sorts of stuff like that. It was a pretty big change, and I personally enjoyed this season. I'm going to put it in the pretty good category. There really wasn't much to not like about this season. It was kind of similar in feel to the first season, and it kind of got old after a while, but aside from that, it was a pretty good season with some good changes. On to Season 3 though, and we've got the Vibin season. This was sort of like the, I guess, summer chill type season. For example, we had the Rave Cave added. We had all sorts of like ballers and stuff like that added. We also had things like the Hammer AR, the 2-shot shotgun, and the Marksman rifle. As well as that, the Battle Pass was pretty cool. I don't think there was much too memorable about competitive, and honestly, throughout Chapter 3, competitive really wasn't that great. But I'd say, overall, I'd put it in the pretty good category, right with Season 2. Moving on though, Season 4 is where we had the Chrome situation and the Herald. It was the final season of Chapter 3, and it was pretty exciting to see, but honestly, I don't really think it was that great. Like, I really expected a lot for the final season, and I feel like this kind of prematurely ended the whole Chapter 3. I mean, we did have the Evo Chrome rifles and stuff like that, and the shotgun, which was pretty cool, and we had a pretty good battle pass, but I really think they could have pulled out a lot more than this to finish off the chapter, and I think it was a good season, but I'm gonna put it in the decent category. It wasn't bad by any means, it just wasn't particularly memorable. Moving on though, and we've got Chapter 4. Chapter 4, we had the whole new map added after the Fracture event. Obviously, we're kind of early in the chapter when I'm making this video, but I think as of now, it's gonna be pretty much towards the top of the great category, if not leaning towards the amazing. The loot pool is awesome, there's tons of cool mobility, and really I just don't have too much to complain about here. Obviously the hammers and stuff are pretty OP, and the what's it called? It was the Excalibur rifle. I don't know why it took me so long to think of that. Then we got cool stuff like the Thunder shotgun, the Maven auto, the Red Eye, the Twin Mag SMG, tactical pistol, and all sorts of other stuff. We also had the reality augments added, which are pretty cool. But with all that said, that's gonna wrap it up for my Fortnite seasons tier list. Here's a picture of the final tier list. Let me know what you guys think of my rankings down in the comments, because I'm curious to see what you all have to say about my choices. I know I'll probably get roasted for some of them, but that's the way it is. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to drop a like on it, and consider subscribing as well if you're new to the channel and want to see all sorts of videos. I mostly do tips and tricks videos, but if you guys enjoyed this one, I might start sneaking sneaking in some more stuff just like this. But with all that said, thank you all for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.